Welcome, everyone. This is Joe Dager, the host of the Business 901 podcast. With me today is Ken Rutsky. Ken helps B2B growth companies, executives in sales, marketing, and the C-suite to break through, achieve, and grow market leadership in new and existing markets. Ken has spent 20 plus years in B2B marketing roles, launching the Intel Inside Broadcast Co-op program in 1991 and the Internet's first affiliate marketing program, Netscape Now. He has been a CMO at several startups and ran network security marketing at McAfee. He has his own consulting practice, now includes FireEye, Nimsoft, and others, and generated over $6 billion of shareholder value through IPOs and acquisitions, while several others have reached private equity valuations of $1 billion plus. Ken, long introduction. Those last numbers were impressive, but excuse my French, okay? What the hell were you doing on the internet in 1991? Who were you talking to?
That's a good story, Joe. I'm glad you asked that because it's a story I haven't told in a long time. When I started my marketing career, I was working for Intel, and the gal sitting next to me, Debbie, in the cube over from me, said, "Hey, Ken, look at this job. You might be interested in this." And I walked over to her cube, and up there on their screen was this job that said, Retail Marketing Manager for Netscape Communications Corporation. And I looked at her and I said, why does this company I've never heard, why does Intel let you put their job postings on your computer? And she's like, no, it's this thing called the internet. I'm like, oh, okay, what's that? So that's how I first learned about the job opportunity. And what I had to do is I had to literally go up to the Intel library and pull up the LexisNexis database and do a search on Mark Andreessen, Jim Clark, and Netscape to educate myself by printing a bunch of articles off of the LexisNexis database because I could go research it on the internet. And lo and behold, 3 months later, I was working at Netscape as about the 200th employee or so. So there I was right at the beginning of something I didn't even understand.
Well, you start out, and I love the book, and I have to ask you about your new book, Launch to Leading. And first of all, what took you so long to write a book with all this experience?
I've been busy working and raising 4 kids. So it's funny, I started writing the book in some ways when I started blogging at the beginning of my consulting practice 7.5 years ago. But I kind of played around with it, and I had a bunch of blog posts, and I had about a quarter of a book written. And then one of my mentors said, Ken, just write the book. Used a little bit of a word there for book. And he said, just write the book. And he challenged me to get it done in 9 months. And I did. I took that challenge and I got the book done. And so, I'm really happy that it's no longer Mr. Rutsky's opus. It's actually a real thing. So that was my journey on writing the book in a very, very short nutshell.
Well, and your book isn't about past history. It's about cutting edge, leading forward, and some real actionable items. I really have to tell you that I enjoyed reading it. Is your first book? Because it didn't read like a first book.
Well, thanks a lot. It's I've been doing a lot of writing all my career, so I guess it was a natural to write a book, and also had some great editors, but a lot of fun writing it. And that really was my what you said about the lean forward is I noticed about 4 or 5 years ago, really 6 or 7 years ago, that marketing was really changing. And the internet, I guess started in 91, and I happened to be lucky enough to be there. But I really think it took a decade or so before that really started to become apparent that it had changed marketing and sales, even in B2B and business-to-business context. And most people still had not gotten their hands around the fundamental ways that sales and marketing had changed and put it together into a cohesive playbook for market leadership. So that was my goal with the book.
Well, one of the areas, and you kind of allude to it here a little bit, but you talk about a mind shift and the mind shift that needs to happen. What is that in your book?
Yeah, in Launching to Leading, I talk a lot about mindset. Mindset to me is a fundamental construct of the way we view the world, and a couple things have changed in the market. The market's mindset, the buyer's mindset, has changed dramatically. It used to be when I started before marketing, I did sales for IBM, and it used to be that in an enterprise sales and marketing or a business-to-business sales and marketing environment, the onus was almost on the buyer to prove that they were worthy to do business with you. And you start that conversation, and the buyer would say, "Well, Ken, can you tell me what you do?" And the sales rep would say, "Well, before I do that, let me really understand what you need." And then the buyer would say, "Yeah, okay," and they'd reluctantly spend all their time telling them, the sales rep about themselves. And this was summarized as solution selling, right? Mm-hmm. Is really design a custom solution for your every individual client you go to see. But the mindset of the buyers totally shifted to, I'm going to drive this as a buying process, not a selling process. And so the buyer's in charge now, and the buyer can find so much information about you, your product, your service, and your competitions that it really changes the dynamic of selling. Most of the customers that a B2B sales rep walks into now know as much, if not more, about the product that sales rep's trying to sell them as the sales rep does. Often more. So oftentimes you're sitting trying to sell something to someone who knows more about it than you do. So it really changes the buying and selling dynamic dramatically.
What I really liked is you talked about scaling up and scaling down, and it did such a great job of it, of being able to situate a company in both places and when they need to do that. Can you just touch upon that and explain that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I use two areas around scaling. I use the metaphor of flash mobs, parades, and movements to talk about the path of market leadership. So when you're first starting, your goal, and I deal with a lot of early stage startups, your goal is really to create this rabid set of early adopter fans and hit that elusive, what they call in the Silicon Valley, product market fit, where you're meeting a need of a market segment. The problem is, if that's all you do, and all you do is talk about your product and get that very first flash mob, dancing and singing about your product, you don't scale up to the next stage of leadership, which I call parade. And markets are really conversations between buyers and sellers, right? At the end of the day, and they're conversations about the exchange of value. But those conversations live in the buyer's context, not the seller's. And the buyer has problems and opportunities related and unrelated to the thing I'm selling them. And there's a great old Pogo cartoon, and that guy was a muskrat or something from the 30s by Walt Kelly. And Pogo's holding a baton, and he's leading a parade, and the caption says, "If you want to be a leader, find a parade and get in front of it." So it's really on the onus of the marketer to say, what are the parades going on in my customer's world that I can kind of get in front of and influence and lead, but they're not my parade, they're my customers. And so scaling up to that parade is really about finding what matters to the customer and influencing that and becoming one of the leaders of that parade. And then beyond that, you can get to what I call a movement where you're changing the world. People like Nike or Salesforce.com are a couple examples of people who went beyond just being market leaders to being world changers. Netscape, was another one of those. So, but you can get all the way to IPO and great financial results and fantastic company by leading the right set of parades or parade. And movement is kind of the hallowed ground that very few reach. But still, it's a good thing to aspire to, because movement is all driven by your business purpose, whether that's business transformation or personal transformation, your customer's business, or to transform that, or transforming the people who use your product. And I think the earlier you start with parades and movements in your mindset, the more successful you are even in the earlier phases of market leadership.
To me, I always called it playing in the customer's playground, that you got to get there and be involved, out there, and and hopefully get on the same seesaw or the same swing, right?
Jim Barksdale, who is the CEO of Netscape, he has a lot of sayings. If you Google Barksdaleisms, you can find a lot of them. But one of my favorite ones of Jim's was, he said, in the battle between the bear and the alligator, the winner's determined by the terrain. And so finding the customer's terrain that you can fight on that's different than your competitors, or defining influencing the terrain of the market or the context of the market, so that you're an alligator in the swamp and your competitors are bears in the swamp, or vice versa, is really what gets you to that ability to outperform and lead your competitors and lead your market.
Well, one of the things I liked about your book, and you have to tell me why you wrote that book with all your experience and everything, why you wrote it this way, was that there was a lot of practical kind of things that I could just read and I could go do. I mean, I could really spend some time. It's not this strategic thing that left me with, what am I going to do Monday morning? I knew what to do Monday morning, okay?
Yeah, I was inspired by a few things there. One is, from a personal mission perspective, I just want to help people become better marketers. And so, I am running a business and building a business, but at the end of the day, if I can accelerate the adoption of these techniques, by giving people good practical advice, then, to me, that's my purpose, right? So I get some personal satisfaction out of providing people with tool sets, and you actually download some of the tools from my website that I talk about in the book. But I think the second thing is, I was influenced a little bit at the later stages of writing the book by people like Insight Selling and Challenger Sale. And, both of those fundamentally say, look, the job of the sales rep is to teach the prospect or the customer, to teach them something. But what I saw in the clients I was consulting to is they had a really hard time scaling that, because very few of the salespeople can actually do that on the fly or on their own. And so I wanted to create a framework that lets you create that insight, what I call a viewpoint story, that you could share and scale across your sales team. Because teaching is so important at the top of the selling and buying cycle, that if you can't do that as a sales force, then you're not influencing and you're not leading. And so I wanted to get some really practical advice to add to kind of some of the state-of-the-art thinking around sales and marketing that was out there. The other thing, that influenced me is, all the hype and rightful hype around content marketing. I still kind of felt like everything I was reading was a cookbook, but it wasn't helping me cook a masterpiece. And I wanted to help the readers who, had to create content marketing and sales messaging to build masterful output as opposed to just quantity of output.
Well, that's one of the things I take from a lot of content marketing books, and we show you how to distribute content. You always have to say, it's got to be meaningful. It's got to be all this cutting edge stuff. You got to be that. But you kind of, is that why you developed the story wheel? Is to kind of give a way to create relevant content to the parade you're trying to lead, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's relevant content is critically important, and it's got to not only be relevant, but it's got to be meaningful, and it's got to be insightful and unique, right? So it's a pretty high bar if you really want to have impact at the high level of your key metrics, like conversion, and like I said, influence the market. And so I've been doing this for a decade, building these kind of innovative stories, and they started to fall into this pattern of a hero's journey, which was essentially, like other people have identified, it's not about you being the hero. Your customer is the hero, but what you can be is the magic. How do you position your value and your product and your innovation to be the magic in your customer's hero's journey that lets them transform their reality to a better one? And when you do that, all of a sudden you have 100 things to talk about that are meaningful. You can talk about what's going on in their world, back to that framing. Zora, who's a subscription billing company, does this brilliantly. All they do is talk about the subscription economy. and they happen to do subscription billing. But by the time you're ready to buy subscription billing, you're kind of like, well, they're the guys who taught me about everything. They must know about that. So and they have entire websites and entire white papers and books and podcasts where they talk about all the different nuances and aspects of the subscription economy and what it means to a business. So because they're talking about something meaningful to their target market, they can talk a lot about it, and it has great meaning. And so that becomes kind of the high test fuel for their go to market. And I always think modern marketing organizations need to do three things really well, and I talk about this in the book. At the beginning of the book, you need to have a great approach to marketing automation. You need to master the technology. Secondly is you need to have great content process and demand gen programs. But what I see is you put those two things together and you have efficiency. Right? And if you think about that like the body and the tires of the race car, right? If you push it, it'll roll forever, but it won't roll very fast. And then you have to fuel it, and the quality and the relevance and the how good that fuel is really what messaging and positioning and what core messages and stories do you feed into that race car. And if you put crappy fuel in the race car, you live near Indianapolis, right?
Yeah.
They don't run those cars on unleaded 89 octane, right? Because all they do is putter along. And a lot of marketing organizations build these beautiful race cars and hire the best drivers in the world, great demand gen people and awesome marketing automation stacks. And then they pour 89 unleaded octane into the car and they wonder why they don't go fast. So to get to relevance and effectiveness, you really have to put great fuel into the car, and that's the focus of the book.
Well, you talk about that relevance and the meaning and things and stuff, but how do I come up with that? Is it all just about user research and getting, like I term it, into the customer's playground to learn it? Do I got to be in there doing it, or can I study it from afar?
I think there's a couple aspects to that. The first one is, in most organizations, you've got a lot of people who do nothing but spend time with customers. And, your good sales reps are your canaries in the coal mine, right? They know what's happening. They know where the competitor's beating me. Yet the bridge between them and marketing is often, as you know, very contentious and weak at best, right? And so I think the best place to go are the experts in your organization as a proxy for the customer, one, and then directly to the customer with some primary research. Customers are great, and they're the most important thing. Their world is the most important thing. One of the things I think that customers have a hard time doing is seeing things other than very incremental, right? If you ask customers about the improvement that they want, right? If you would have asked the average MP3 player user, 15 years ago before the iPod, what's the improvement you want? They would have given you some very low-level feature improvement, or they would have said, I need more storage, right?
Right.
And they didn't really think I need an integrated experience between my library on my desktop and my, home device, and I need that device to navigate much more easily through different ways than scrolling with my, with a button, and I need it to, be more portable, and they just don't always have the vision. But if you have good customer intimacy with your team, you know what is troubling them, and you know what they're trying to accomplish. You can pull that out. And then I think the second thing in the book really, main thing I hope it does for people is give you a structured framework and a proven framework that gets you to meaningful results if you pour that customer knowledge into it. Because it's one thing to have the customer knowledge, it's another thing to scale it in your organization and say it in a way that is going to break through the noise and the clutter out there. And the frameworks in the book are pretty well proven to do that, and that's one of the other reasons I wanted to share them.
Well, of all the companies you have worked with, okay, is there one particular one that kind of can be our case study or case model that adheres to what you talk about in the book?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies, by the way, that I don't work with who apply very similar principles. One of the companies that I worked with early on in my consulting engagements, and I write about them in a lot of detail in the book, is FireEye. When I first engaged with FireEye, they were about a $3 million revenue company, privately held, and really didn't have their value proposition articulated. They didn't know what category they were in. They didn't know how to differentiate themselves from other network security, which is the broader space they play in, offerings. They didn't know they knew what was unique with them from a feature perspective, but they didn't know how to articulate that in a customer context and in a value perspective. We helped them do that. And early on, we created this idea of Modern Malware Exposed, which was the name of our campaign. And essentially what it said is, your world's changed. Let us expose that to you and talk to you about how that's changing so dramatically. And then we'll talk to you about the gap you have in your defenses or your ability to deal with this changed world and where we can get you. But the first thing we really want to do is talk to you about the challenge that you have in today's world. They took that from 3 million to multiple hundreds of millions in revenue and rode that positioning all the way to an IPO. In the process, they created a new category, which originally they called Modern Malware Defense. They changed that a little bit to Advanced Malware Defense, but it was the same fundamental message, is that malware's advanced and your defenses have to. And they really hooked into I think two things that were happening in the customer's environment. One was just a general fear, frankly, of keeping up with the bad guys. And the second was a well-identified gut feeling that what they were doing wasn't enough. There were several product categories that were shrinking and large. I mean, I'm talking about billion-dollar plus product categories, multi-billion-dollar plus product categories that people bought because they felt they had to, but deep down they had this feeling like, but I'm not doing enough. And FireEye connected those two things. The world's changed, and you already know you're not doing enough, to how do you get ahead of the curve. So that's been a pretty good success story. Those guys are still out there. They did an IPO in the I think $6 billion plus range. They had some business execution challenges around valuation and stuff that have changed the dynamic, but they're still known today as the leader in that category, and that's viewed as an established, meaningful category now.
What jumps out at me is that when we finally get that company that really differentiates themselves, and the Airbnbs and the Ubers and stuff, the ones that just jump right out and take so much large market share, is it's normally was an outgrowth of a just basic mature market, and all at once that little niche, that little differentiation just explodes.
Yeah. I think what happens if you go back to the flash mob parade and metaphor analogy, right, is you've got parades happening all the time. And out of those, when those parades become larger and they become movements, or they become multiple parade markets. So in FireEye's case, within network security, not to get too technical, but you had the firewall market, you had the intrusion prevention, you had the network access and control market, or NAC. All those markets were, between $1 billion and $5 billion. You had like a $20 billion overall market with these parades marching along. And out of that is an opportunity to break off. If you think, you use the visual of the parade, is if I break off from that parade and say something that's meaningful to the market, how many of those people are going to follow me out of those existing parades and create a new one? And so I think it's almost a bubbling out, and it's a maturity. As these parades get old, people are tired of watching them, right? And they want to know the new one, but the new one only matters if it solves customers' problems and it takes them to a new place. And so I think that's where, Uber as an example, nobody was running around saying, I need a better taxi cab, right? But all of a sudden now you said, look, I'm not a taxi cab, I'm this thing called Uber that you run off of your phone. And all of a sudden, the next time I needed a taxi cab, I said, oh, I don't have any cash. Let me try this app Uber. And then I get the experience. I say, wow, that's better. It's a better way to get around. And all of a sudden I stop riding taxi cabs. Mm-hmm. Right? So, they didn't go say we're a next generation taxi cab because that's old news, right? They said we're something different. We're ride sharing, whatever that means. Who are you actually sharing with? We're more like, on demand rides, right? So they get their own parade. They get to be worth $10 billion. And then, now what's happening, right, is a bunch of people are saying, oh, in my local market, I can out Uber, right? And then the question is, what's beyond Uber? And then, you have to look in, you get your crystal ball on transportation out a little bit, and you look at companies, everyone from BMW to new companies like Faraday Futures, and they're talking about, electronic ride-shared, next generation smart vehicles. Now that's like a mouthful, and what's that going to mean from the market perspective? They're trying to disrupt and create a new parade around, think about transportation in a totally different way.
When I first picked up the book, Launching to Leading, okay, I thought, my first thing went to leadership. I kind of, mistaken that is that, oh, this is a leadership book. It's how I should lead and not necessarily lead a launch. But I was a little confused. But really that launching to leading fits what you talk about in the book really, really well if I would have just thought about it right in the first place.
Well, maybe that's a good hint for me, because the other thing I do, and I'm doing more of these days, is helping go-to-market leaders, the people, to understand how they need to build not only their skills, but their team structure so that they can actually execute on strategies like I write about in the book. Because marketing is, in my mind, becoming more and more important. And some of that goes back to some of the early trends we were talking about. Like 60% of the sale, according to Corporate Executive Board, is done before the customer even wants to talk to a sales rep. So what does that mean? It means marketing needs to take people much further in the buying process through their demand gen programs, their nurturing programs, and the like, almost getting the customer to shortlist. So, in the battle of power between sales and marketing, they're both really important, and they both always will be. But the amount of responsibility that the go-to-market strategy has to drive now, as opposed to the selling strategy, has shifted from 30-70 to 70-30. And that puts a lot of pressure on organizations to understand how to build go-to-market leadership teams, and on leaders to be a lot more adept at a lot more things than they were in the past.
We talk about, not getting into the selling cycle to 60 or 70%, but there also seems to be a huge percentage of no decisions being made nowadays than what there was before. Is there any truth to that, or have you seen that?
Yeah, I think what I see is that in any Uber category, so let's say sales automation or sales solutions or marketing solutions or security solutions or shipping solutions, whatever it is, there are so many innovative products out there that have great ROI that the buyer is overwhelmed with choices. And I think a lot of the no decisions come from the fact, like if you take a CMO, people I deal with as my clients every day, right? They can make 3,000 new marketing automation investments alone, but they only really have the ability to make 5 or 6 in a given year, in a given cycle, business cycle. So you've got, within marketing, let's say marketing technology, you've probably got 40 or 50 subcategories, and you've got hundreds of vendors in each one of those. They decide we're going to do these 2 subcategories, maybe account-based marketing automation and lead management, right? Those are our 2 key initiatives. Right now, they've just taken those 3,000 vendors and narrowed it to 400. And so the other 2,600 vendors feel like it's all no decision. I don't understand. We talked. You said I had a great value and great ROI, but you're not doing anything. Well, I just can't get to it. And the can't get to it really comes from what you do is not strategic to me in solving my world's problems. And so how do you solve that as a vendor or as a supplier, you solve that again by connecting to the context of the customer so that what you do becomes so important they can't live without what you do. And then if I lose to the competition, at least someone bought something and I grew the category.
So many times we just blame it on the sales guy, right? Because marketing got him down to the 10-yard line and sales didn't score the touchdown.
Well, I like to quote Spike Lee here because I don't think it's just marketing's job to get leads that are, quote unquote qualified, right? You don't need more leads and you don't need better leads. This is where I'll quote Spike Lee. You need Mo Better leads. If you remember his movie Mo Better Blues, right? So we need Mo Better leads, and more means we have that efficiency through our automation and our programs. But better means we're influencing the buyer to put more priority on what we do because we have articulated why we have a greater impact on their world than all the other things they could do.
And in saying that, we also have to respect the buyer and know their business, that it is actually that important to them to rise to the top, right?
You got it.
Well, Launching to Leading is a great book. I think it was, I highly recommend it for people. Tell me, is there a book website? How can someone learn more and get a hold of you?
Yeah, not surprisingly, you can go to launchingtoleading.com.
Okay.
That'll actually take you to kenrutsky.com and a page all about the book. But within that site, you can find much more information about me. The book is available through all the usual suspects, Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, bookstores, and it'll be hitting retail shelves, hopefully in a bookstore near you, in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Well, and since this podcast will air, I think the release date is February 7th. Am I not sure?
That's correct. Okay. That's correct. But it is available online now.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. I would like to thank you very much, Ken. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the book or about yourself that maybe I didn't ask?
I just think if I left your audience with one thought, it would be don't focus on telling your story. Focus on telling your customer's story and how you can make that have a better ending.
And I think that's very well said. I would like to thank you very much. This podcast will be available in the Business 901 iTunes Store and the Business 901 website. I want to thank all the listeners for listening. So thank you, Ken, too.
Thank you.